So thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to Canva Flourish HQ in Hoxton Square. It's very nice to see so many of you here. I know lots of your faces, but also lots of unfamiliar ones as well. I was just going to do a little opening introduction, set the scene a little bit. So my name is Duncan Clark. I head up Europe for Canva, and I'm one of the co-founders of Flourish. So we launched Flourish about, 6 years ago now, but we were actually working on this in this area of data storytelling for much longer. So my background originally was as a journalist. I was at The Guardian, where I worked really closely with Robin Houston, who became the other co-founder of Flourish, and we set out about 10 years ago to try and explore what you could do with interactive data storytelling on the web now that web browsers were starting to support cooler, more modern tech. So doing things like trying to do journalistic representations of women's rights or personalizing climate change data with fancy maps or with custom stories based on the audience putting their year of birth in, that kind of thing. So that led to several years of creating data stories on a bespoke basis, which in turn led us to set up Flourish. Our feeling was that we were doing all this stuff bespoke, and every time we published something, we found that someone wanted something similar, and we realized that actually this whole area could be brought to life with a tool that took the same ideas, these ideas of interaction and animation and step-by-step storytelling, but made them available to everyone with a tool that made it easy to do at scale. So that's what we launched in 2018 in February. So yeah, probably 6.5 years in at this point. And growing out of that journalistic background, it was always a tool that combined interactive charts and interactive maps with other kinds of interactive content, things like calculators, quizzes, photo sliders, anything that you would typically do on the interactive desk of a newsroom. And so it's been great to be able to take all of that kind of approach into different sorts of companies and organizations. So these days, most of you here will probably know Flourish already. We're very widely used now by newsrooms, corporates, and all different sorts of agencies and other companies. And by virtue of being very widely used in journalism, we're also very, very widely viewed. So I think we have, roughly 1 billion views a month, that kind of thing, of our Flourish visualizations embedded on other news sites. And I think since we launched, we're probably at over 30. I can't remember the last version of this slide I saw. Yeah, 32 billion at this point. So we've been seeking to take this data storytelling to as wide an audience as possible. The reason we are here in the Canva HQ is because in 2021, we, as Flourish, were acquired by Canva. And so that's where Canva's European operation started growing up in this country, and I have this lovely shared office where we work on both products. And just to put a little bit of context around Canva, which might be less familiar to this audience or some people in it. So Canva is a very, very widely used tool for visual communication and design. It's set out also 10 years ago to empower the world to design. We've now got 190 million people use it every month. So it's very, very big, very global. And it's all about democratizing visual communication. So the Flourish acquisition, us folding into Canva, was about extending that visual communication and storytelling through to data. So we're really here now seeking to empower organizations all over the world to tell stories with data. And that takes us to today. So this gathering has been organized as part of London Data Week, which is a free citywide festival. I have not been involved in a London Data Week thing before, so I'm really excited both to be involved, but also to be hosting this, and hope this is the start of many similar events that we do in the future. We want all your feedback on what you'd like to see, so do talk to us all and share ideas for other events we might want to do. So that's today, and diving in a little bit to the detail. So we've done the little welcome. We're going to have a keynote session with Andy Kirk and Mike and Chris from the GLA. We're then going to have a panel where we've got 4 wonderful speakers from all these different organizations, which I will be chairing. There's going to be a workshop with Simon from Storytelling with Data, and then there'll be drinks afterwards. So with that, I will pass over to Andy Kirk.
Thank you, Duncan. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you ever so much for coming along to this event. It's great to see, as Duncan mentioned, faces that are familiar, many that are not, which is something that we hope to get from this session. Now, I've got a very limited time, but before I get into my time, so a quick thank you and extremely well done to Mafe, to George and the team for organising this event. Very, very well done. It's been turned around very quickly, so thank you everyone on the organising team and the delivery team today for doing that. Data storytelling, shaping our work, life, and our city. Storytelling as a concept will be unfamiliar to many of you. Actually, even those of you who are familiar in this world of data viz and data might have different understandings of what it means to us and to you. And part of this session today is to make these concepts accessible and understandable and relevant to everyone. Because this is a world of data that touches everybody, whether we are creators or consumers or users. For the benefit of this next 10 minutes or so, don't get too caught up in the semantics of language, but I'm going to use this sort of notion of content with context as the essence of storytelling, with the purpose being to enable understanding. And I'm going to sort of show you how I've used content with context to get here today, because as is probably already very clear, I'm not from London. That's where we had today, in case you were confused. I'm not from London. I'm from a city called Leeds, which I'm not here to peddle stereotypes, but I know that many of you down here think that we're all there. So Leeds is the pink dot, and then you've got Newcastle next door, and Liverpool and Manchester next door, and Birmingham up there, and Glasgow, Edinburgh. The reality is that we're there. So Leeds is technically 200 miles away from London. So for long distance nomads like myself, this is quite an undertaking to get here today. And I'm going to tell you all about it. You might think, oh, this is going to be a boring 10 minutes. It's going to be loads of fun. So here's my timeline today, 6 a.m. to roughly the 3 p.m. kickoff. The key milestones, I have to get up at some point. So the alarm went off at 6, didn't necessarily wake up at 6, just sort of meandered a bit, looked at social media and got angry about life. The deadline at the other end was to realise I have to be here for 2 o'clock to get set up at Canva HQ. So that's the basic key milestones for today. Now, London to us people in Leeds is essentially King's Cross. That's our entry point into this world. And I'm sure you've all been aware that over the last, sorry, I'll come to that in a second, but to get to here in time for 2 o'clock, I have to work out how to get here from King's Cross. So the first visual content I used to help me was to plan my journey from King's Cross to get here, which is a combination of a tube, about 10 minutes on the Northern Line, and then a walk of about 12 minutes. So that's kind of working backwards. That's where everything starts. Now, in terms of trains, as I said, everything's about King's Cross, and it's not been a great 18 months of train experiences. This is one of the pages that the train company LNER publish about their delays and cancellations. It's just wild out there in terms of train punctuality. But there are plenty of options. And typically a train from Leeds down here takes at most 2 hours 18, but there are plenty of options. So again, in planning my journey down here, I can leave it to the last minute with a 11:15 from Leeds, which costs £33.10. Or I can get up at 7 for the super deluxe exclusive express that only stops at Wakefield, which you should never do anyway. £122.90, that's where all the bigwigs execs go. Now, I don't trust the train to arrive on time. And so I'm going to build in already an earlier train to get here, to not necessarily jump off the train and sprint over here. I'll get a coffee, but actually that's lunchtime. I also want to have a bit of lunch. I'm going to take it a little bit earlier, splash the cash possibly with a £47.80 train. Now, lots of options, but I have to get to the station in the first place. So where I live compared to where Leeds Station is about a 20-minute drive, about a 10-minute walk. My wife was driving to work today. Can I get a lift? Yes, you can. Great. So I need to have a shower, which I did do. You'd be thankful to know, and put on some clothes, which I also did. And then we set off around sort of 7:30, 7:45. That gives me another parameter at the start of the day to work with. Back to the trains. So these are my options. I cannot risk, even though it's very attractive, I cannot risk that first one. Let's get rid of it. And let's just chill out. Let's get to the station and chill out. But actually, I might need some breakfast. And again, with this idea of content and context, I know that I can find a good cafe. There's a place called Social Folk just outside the station area. Good reviews. You can read the reviews. That gives me some information to base it on. But more importantly, the context is they serve Marmite toast, which is my life force. So I can use that to say, right, forget those early trains. I'm going to get some Marmite toast down me, chill out a little bit in town, and then maybe choose from these three. A little bit of a walk. But these are now my three. Now, I don't need to delay getting to London. It makes sense to get down here. So I'm going to pick the first one, the 9:15 from Leeds to King's Cross, 2 hours 15, £51.50. Now, seat time. I have a very, very clear system of how to make a seat selection. Let me talk you through it. So here's the train layout. Now, first of all, there's no way I'm splashing out for a first-class seat, not today. And so I can eliminate those carriages. The direction of the travel is that way. So I want to be as close to the front as possible to minimize the walking when you get off the train. What else is there? Well, there's lots of seats already booked, so I can't grab those. I don't want to sit on the table because that's just for maniacs. I don't want to look at people. I don't want to have to battle for my laptop space, see what they're eating or drinking. So forget the tables. Sometimes it's sunny in the UK, and when you come in south, it's on the left of the train. So forget all those. I don't want to melt on my way down to London. Getting limited now. What else have we got? Prefer a window seat. So we're now down to just these selections. I want to go forward facing. I don't want to be near the vestibules or the toilet traffic. I've now got 4 to choose from. I don't want anyone behind me looking at my stuff, my work. So it's obviously H55. I'm sure you can all agree there. So that's how I used information and also my understanding of things like the sunny side of the train to choose my seat. Looking last night to get these screen grabs, and it was full. So it was a crazy train full of all sorts of people traveling today. Lots of very noisy people. So that's my train booked. Now I've got a bit of time to kill. And the way I tend to kill time in London when I'm traveling down here is to use the British Library as a hangout space. So short walk to the British Library, do a bit of work there. So this is a very recent shot of me working on this talk over lunchtime in the British Library. And that gives me today's plan. So what we've got there is an informed decision-making process that's based both on facts and figures and information and data and charts, but also based on experience and knowledge. And that is what we mean by content, context. Content is the information that we use to decide what's available, what timings exactly will happen, how long will journeys take, from the various tables and charts and maps and text and statistics. And it's a bundle of things that we use for this storytelling material. But it's also context. So I know exactly where to stand on Leeds Station to get to my door. I mean, that is literally me not moving, taking a photograph this morning. That's where I need to stand to get to my door. That's based on experience. That's based on a degree of research and trial and error. And these are all things that help me to better understand how to make decisions. And so in the content that you're going to experience today, in talks from Mike and Chris shortly, from the panel and from the workshop from Simon, it's about not just data in isolation. It's not just charts and graphics in isolation. It's all this suite of information and data that we can draw in material form, but blend that with context to help explain things, to help give people some understanding of what it is they're consuming and why it matters to them. And so hand over to Mike and Chris, just to focus on this subtitle, which I think is a great subtitle to capture the essence of today's session. It's about our work down here. It's about our work. It's about our life. It's about our city. We've all got a role to play. We've all got a touch point into this world. Mike and Chris are now going to go through is how that affects the people of London through their wonderful work. So, Mike and Chris, over to you guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andy. Hopefully we can live up to that, to the billing. Let me just adjust this. Sick.
Mic check.
Mike's mic check.
Mic check.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. And thanks, Canva and Andy, for asking us to speak to you all today. We are humbled and terrified to be here. So, welcome to our talk, City Intelligence London Through the Data Lens. Before we start, a quick bit of background about both of us. So I'm Mike, I'm the Data Viz and Information Design Lead at the City Intelligence Unit as part of the Greater London Authority. We'll come to that in a minute, it's complicated. Before joining the GLA around 6 years ago, I specialised at the more sort of data art end of the Viz spectrum, so commercial and arts projects. And I've created data-driven visual identity for the Information is Beautiful Awards. Yeah, I've turned data into mandalas for Tiger Beer. I worked with Stephanie Pozavec on this project for Papworth Hospital, where we encoded real patient heart and lung data into a series of artworks that were applied to patient rooms across the hospital. And I've also worked with Valentina De Filippo and Miriam Quick on their lovely project, visualizing the music and lyrical structures of David Bowie's Space Oddity.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I work as a data visualization developer with Mike in Mike's team. My journey here is slightly twisty. I set up and ran a gallery and shop and an online shop just around the corner from here in the early 2000s, where I exhibited work by graphic artists and illustrators, as well as publishing books and making T-shirts and ephemera by those artists. When children came along and my priorities changed, I had a career running a web design studio, building digital products and making very spidery content graphs. Before taking a little time to work on my own generative art projects, which is where I really started to explore data-driven generative design, where the source data supplied to a program or algorithm can create an almost endless series of results, which is how I got into data visualization and find myself at the CIU.
So today,
this is my bit.
We rehearsed it.
We have rehearsed it. So today, we're going to start by telling you a little bit about London, the Greater London Authority's relationship to it, and where our team within the City Intelligence Unit sits. Then we will take a, sorry, Mike's just changing the font size there. Then we'll take a quick fire look at our data projects, split across the broad themes of public comms, infrastructure planning, and policy making. And these projects shape and communicate policy, inform how London's organisations operate, and help Londoners find out about their own city. Hopefully, we'll make you think about different audiences for your own data, what stories or insights they need, and perhaps even inspire you to think about more creative and expressive ways of displaying data. Okay, let's go. So first of all, a content warning. This talk contains a lot of maps of London. And we also use a lot of TLAs, three-letter acronyms. It's a kind of endemic in the public sector that we work in. So a little bit about London. London is divided into 32 boroughs, plus the City of London. The largest borough is Bromley, covering just over 150 square kilometres. And the smallest borough is Kensington and Chelsea, which is just over 12 kilometres square, or square kilometres. London's total area is approximately 1,500 square kilometres, and nearly 33% of London's surface area is green space. London's tallest building is the Shard at just under 310 metres, which is nearly 3 times the height of St Paul's Cathedral at 111 metres. And its deepest tube station is Hampstead at 58.5 metres below ground level. And London's population is nearly 9 million people.
And so overseeing all this is the Greater London Authority, or the GLA. There's another TLA for you. So the GLA, or City Hall, is the strategic authority for Greater London. It's got powers over things like transport, policing, economic development, and emergency planning. It shares local government powers with 32 boroughs, the 32 boroughs plus the City of London. And because it can take a citywide view of London, the GLA can take a convening cross-borough role. For example, this allows us, the City Intelligence Unit, to gather, process, analyse and present data in a consistent and comparable way to all boroughs, so making strategic conversations easier. So who are the CIU, or the City Intelligence Unit? In short, the CIU provide data and analysis to inform policies that make a difference to Londoners' lives. All the work we'll show here, to make a difference to Londoners' lives. All the work we'll show here today takes many people within the CIU and beyond to produce. And so when I say we, I definitely mean them too. Our team within the CIU produce visualization products across multiple channels, including static graphics, dashboards, explorers, notebooks, and interactive web maps. Some of these are intended to investigate and interrogate data. Some are designed to intrigue and introduce hard data in a more gentle and inclusive way. We've got a lot of projects to talk about. Hopefully they'll give a sense of the breadth of the work we produce and the different domains involved in properly understanding a city. We're going to run over these quickly, but if you do want to talk more about a project, then you can catch us afterwards, or if we've got time for questions, then we'll maybe take some questions at the end. So our work varies in both scale and impact. Public comms projects tend to focus on helping millions of Londoners understand their city better, or to help them make individual everyday decisions. The pandemic obviously had a dreadful effect on people's lives, but it also did a lot to increase the public's appetite for visualization and data literacy. During the pandemic, we certainly produced our fair share of COVID-related charts and maps. So updated throughout the pandemic, this dashboard shows daily case numbers for each borough, displayed as small multiple time series arranged in a London squared cartogram layout. We also kept the London data store pages updated with the daily COVID figures. And this helped Londoners and decision makers understand what was happening with COVID at a London level and a borough level. With climate change driving more extreme weather events, the Cool Spaces map helps Londoners find shelter from the heat. On hot days like last week, Londoners can find cool space venues, water fountains and parks with hot weather amenities. And recently we've been trying to help Londoners find data about their own area more easily. People don't always know which borough they live in, or they move around a lot. So we recently developed a simple postcode search app. So to help Londoners find data on how many affordable homes have been built in their borough over the recent years, and we also use the same tool to help connect Londoners to information about cost of living support, or applying for creative enterprise funding, that sort of thing.
Obviously, public communications isn't just COVID rates and housing numbers. We also help Londoners find nice and free things to do, like community events, art trails, and on this map, locations of parks, waterways, and nature reserves. Now, the opposite of public communications in scale and impact are these infrastructure planning projects. These are where we help often a very small number of people make massive decisions about infrastructure that affect the lives of a very large number of people. Before you can plan any infrastructure, you need to know how many people live in each area of London and how that might change in the future. The GLA demography team publish population projections to support planning, policy development, and local service delivery. We produced a web-based dashboard for these projections, giving users easy, filterable access to gigabytes of raw data. This population data is used as an evidence base for the London plan. and helps assess future needs for housing, school places, health services and transport infrastructure. Working with the GLA, the London Office of Technology and Innovation, or LOTI, Transport for London, or TfL, and London councils, our team built the latest electric vehicle charger dashboard. It brings together data on London's EV charge points to help plan the deployment of the new infrastructure. The clustered donuts here show usage data, which is critical for officers who are planning the future rollout of new chargers. Here, the dashboard is showing areas in green that are within a 3-minute walk of a charger. Pairing this with residential addresses in red helps you see which homes are best served by public chargers. Now, maybe only about 30 people will look at this dashboard, but it's that group of people who will guide where this vital new charger infrastructure is going to be placed in London.
Our broadband map shows the hotspots and not spots of the different types of broadband connection at London, borough, ward and postcode level. Again, only a few people will access this application, but supporting the upgrading of London's digital connectivity is obviously vital work. Our planning data map provides masses of spatial data about London planning policy, like areas that are designated as open space, conservation areas, or at risk of flooding. And I believe in a world first, London has gathered together all the local planning data from each of its 33 boroughs. This amounts to thousands of spatial layers, all discoverable through the map with a simple location search. As we've mentioned, some of our applications have a low but important number of users. The planning map, however, is one of our most popular applications. In the first 4 months of 2024, the service serving the spatial data racked up over 8 million requests. Not as big as Duncan's Flourish numbers, but there you go. So one of the GLA's most complex dashboards is the infrastructure mapping application, or IMA. The tool is managed by the GLA's infrastructure coordination service. So water, energy, transport and local authority users share their planned future infrastructure works. So each other's projects are discoverable in the application. And IMA is used to identify collaboration opportunities by finding projects that overlap in space and time. And so when collaborations can be found, it reduces disruption for Londoners. It also creates benefits for the collaborators, such as trench sharing, joint traffic permits, shared on-site storage, and reduced road closures. Basically, digging up the road once and sharing the whole is good for everyone. So far, this tool has saved well over 1,000 days of disruption and nearly £2 million in costs.
To create the right policies, decision makers need access to data and evidence to answer questions like, how is London's air quality or levels of poverty? Who lives where and are they moving? How are Londoners feeling? What are they struggling with and how do they spend their time? How are high streets recovering from the pandemic? The State of London is a quarterly report that gives a comprehensive and up-to-date snapshot of London's economic and social outcomes. It's an evidence base on which the Mayor's team bases its policy decisions that impact the lives of London's nearly 9 million people. The report covers themes like crime, the economy, poverty, housing, and the environment, and has been cited by publications like The Economist. Providing this kind of report on London's realities is crucial to audiences from across the political, economic, and social spectrum.
So everyone here will have probably filled out the census in 2021. Anonymized census data helps us understand where the various demographic groups of Londoners live and how this may have changed over time. For example, knowing this is useful to the GLA comms team to tailor their message to languages spoken in different areas, or to help the GLA direct resources to areas of most impact or need. The survey of Londoners has been run twice and interviews over 8,000 people, which is a pretty large cohort for this kind of survey. It helps us understand the lives of Londoners and how London has changed since the pandemic. It gauges opinion on a range of topics, and the results help the Mayor deliver programmes to support Londoners, including housing, building strong communities, helping Londoners with their mental health and well-being, and providing a robust safety net. We worked on the graphics for the London-wide summary report, but we also worked on an online survey explorer, which allows you to dig below the London level figures. So having access to this more granular data helps policymakers understand the challenges faced by particular groups of Londoners and work out how best to help them.
The High Streets Data Service is a data sharing partnership between the GLA, London boroughs and business improvement districts, which was born out of the pandemic recovery mission. The service gives local officers the data that they need to shape policy, strategy and investment decisions on London's 600 plus high streets and 200 plus town centres. The data covers domains like footfall, spend, audience, business offerings, local environment and accessibility. And that's the first time I've not said football. Footfall and spend data comes to us anonymised and aggregated, so we have no knowledge of an individual's movements and transactions, only aggregated patterns and trends for an area. As an example, from one of the services tools, here we're comparing Kilburn High Road's MasterCard transactions to other local high streets. And here, showing the change in Kilburn's footfall before, during, and after the pandemic. In another tool, we have borough level data for day, sorry, I'm getting some feedback, for day, night, weekday, and weekend footfall, split by workers and visitors, so users can get a feel for the type of and motivation of the visitors to their high street. And footfall rankings for each high street, town centre, and bid, so that we can see where is busy and with which type of visitor. Now there are 18 London boroughs and 17 business improvement districts subscribing to the service each year. It's becoming a uniquely pan-London shared evidence base, and it's a pioneering model of public-private data collaboration. Partnership gives local government access to the power of big data from private sector companies like BT, MasterCard and Experian. The GLA gives data science, visualization and service support that helps make that data actionable.
As we've seen here, London is a big and multi-dimensional. We make a lot of maps, dashboards and tools to help people understand the city. The way we talk to those people varies depending on who they are, what they need to know, and what they're trying to do. Generally, our output is pretty analytical, but is there a different lens we can apply when telling London's data story? A lens that is maybe more sympathetic to the subject of the data? Drawing on our experience working in generative and data art fields, we started a bit of speculative visual research. Given how many maps we produce, we've wondered, can we represent London's geography differently? After various experiments, we struck on the simple idea of connecting the centre of each borough to the points along its boundary. And we noticed that these looked a bit like frost patterns on glass or flower heads. Extruding those borough shapes out into 3D, we began to enhance that flower feel a bit more. And so then we wondered how would London's wards look? And so here's all 680 of them looking like a dandelion. And what if we combine boroughs and wards together and make each into a solid cone, much more flower-like, we think. And here the larger flowers are the boroughs and the smaller flowers are their wards. Finally, to make London's geography even more flower-like, we improved the curves of the stems and made the flower cones taper into a more elegant and orchid-like way. Finally, render it nicely in 3D software, and it's a whole new way of viewing London's geography. We were pretty pleased with this flower shape, but the overall arrangement was still being driven by random values. We needed to make the flower structures more meaningful by flowing real data into the encoding of each of the borough and ward flowers. As it happens, we were working on the Census Explorer at the time, and I wondered what would the data for Londoners born in Europe look like in this flower structure? And here it is, the hydrangea of European-born Londoners. I think it's a hydrangea, that's what we worked. We went on Wikipedia and went, hydrangea. A representation of London's boroughs and wards driven by the latest census data. Nice. But perhaps if we're talking about EU Londoners, the data should be encoded in a ramp based on the blue and yellow of the EU flag. As a final touch, we simplified things by turning the ward flowers those individual wardflowers into individual stamen of the larger borough flower. And so this final render of the flower of EU Londoners is where that visualization R&D project paused. Just let that run for a minute.
We had to wait a little while for the right project to come along to use this approach, but London's wellbeing and sustainability measure seemed like a perfect fit. We could use this new lens to communicate the spirit and qualitative aspects of the project and not just the analytics. London made a commitment to create an alternative measure of prosperity, a measure which captures how we're doing as individuals and communities and what a good quality of life means. GDP is a useful indicator in some ways, but to deal with crises of environment degradation, physical and mental health and loneliness, we need a more nuanced set of measures. We help map that complex set of 7 domains and 46 measures as the project was evolving. And then to create the project branding, we collapsed the domains and measures into this motif, which is a logo born out of the structures of the project itself, and a logo that hints at interconnection and has the natural and organic forms of a flower. Using what we'd learned earlier, we used the logo as a flower head and mapped the data on London's access to green space to each borough flower. Using this 3D data of access to green space, we set about rendering abstract photography that we use throughout the project materials, like presentations, written reports, and the website, which contained a data explorer tool, and video explainers, produced to help Londoners understand the wellbeing work and to explain the policy to policymakers how to use the measure in their own projects.
Producing this measure was a huge collaborative effort from across the City Intelligence Unit. Hopefully our design contribution will help engage Londoners and policymakers and encourage them to take a more well-being approach to measuring prosperity, and of course give them access to the data and the toolkits needed to deliver it. So today we've tried to give you a glimpse of the scale and quantity of our data projects and how diverse the data needs to be to properly tell the story of a city like London. Hopefully you now feel inspired to explore with data yourselves, not only for analytical purposes, but also to find ways of unlocking the potential beauty of a data set and the insightful stories that that data could be used to tell. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for those talks. They were all great. And next up, we have a panel discussion. So while we're doing this panel discussion, I'm going to be asking the panel some questions, but you can also go to this QR code, so feel free to grab it and submit a question that you would like to have asked. We'll do a mixture of audience and questions and other discussions. Oops, sorry, here we go. So I've got a few notes that I'm going to pull up here. Maybe retire this laptop. Cool. So firstly, I want to introduce our panel. So we have 4 speakers today who are going to join me on the stage here. So we have Carolyn Stebbings, who's the Chief Operating Inclusion Officer at RAP. We have Hazal Mutar who's the Director of Product Analytics at WISE. We have Martina from the Tony Blair Institute, the Head of Design there, and we have David from Charter. So I think if you all want to join me, we will get the discussion going. So maybe to start us off, if we go round in this direction, you could just confirm which of the speakers I just introduced you are, so people know how to place you. And then if you could also answer what you would say data storytelling means for you in your field.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Hazal. I'm the Director of Analytics at WISE. Storytelling, I think the keynote speaker did a great job actually explaining my answer. To me, storytelling is contextualizing data. Data without context is just numbers. It's not information, it's not knowledge, and it's not usable. I think we confuse data from insight a lot of the times, and what makes the difference is that context. So storytelling is a great way way to add context to what you're looking at. So that's what it means for me.
I absolutely hate microphones. So I'm actually told at work I'm not allowed a microphone because my voice is so loud. And I was at a talk last night with probably about 200 people and I stood without a microphone. So someone might have to tell me if I'm too loud. I'm Carolyn Stebbings. I'm the D&I representative on the panel here, and how we use data to tell a story in what is becoming a very much talked about subject and a very complex subject. It's the easiest way to use really beautiful visualizations of the data, especially as my market gets more and more complex. It is no longer about ethnicity and gender. There's the intersectionality of so many other things because we aren't just one thing. That's me.
Hi, my name is Martina, head of design at TBI. For me, data storytelling, I mean, kind of permeates everything we do. We work a lot with policy experts, and we work with a lot of data, a lot of surveys, a lot of polling data. And in the past, there'd just be reams and reams, pages of tables, impenetrable. I think data storytelling, visualization of that data has really democratized how data is consumed. And it allows people to kind of immediately sort of understand, what you're trying to convey. So, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Oh, a bit too loud. My name is David. I'm the founder of Charter. So if you're not familiar, Charter is a news company or a media company. And so, yeah, data storytelling, I guess for me, I mean, it's the two words data storytelling are in every email I think Charter has ever sent, from the very first one, which went out to a few friends and family who I pestered for their email addresses, to the one we'll send out today to a few 100,000 readers. So yeah, for us it's at the very core of what we do. Every story is anchored by a chart or a graph. We don't really use the word graph, we stick to chart. But yeah, it's literally at the core of what we do. So trying to find interesting stories and surface data that maybe hasn't been seen by a wide audience is yeah, our bread and butter, I guess, and always trying to get better at it.
Cool, thank you. So maybe to stick with Charter for a moment. So you published this very high engagement newsletter, and you've become real experts, I think, in going from a chart to a story. And what would you say for all these other practitioners in the room? What are the key things that differentiate those two things? How do you make sure that something is engaging and impactful from the storytelling perspective?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the thing I know nothing about is data, dashboards, maps. The stuff you guys were showing was amazing because it's so far from kind of my wheelhouse in some ways. I think like the ability to do what I would call like data exploration, and you have a data set, you don't know the story of that data set, and you need to build the infrastructure around it to get the insights, and then the policymakers potentially or whoever it might be in your audience can work out what they need to do with it. I think I'm almost at the other end of the spectrum where it's kind of like there is a story that's happening in the news or that people are interested in. And again, coming back to that word Andy used, which is context, can we just go that one layer deeper on this story? So something's happened, Amazon brings out the Alexa. Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting tech story. The one level deeper that we found, or that others had reported on as well, is the number of people called Alexa, the number of babies named Alexa plummeted because nobody, I guess, has wanted to be associated with that product. So I think for us, we're, like I said, almost at the other end of that exploration versus storytelling spectrum. We're always looking for something's happened. Can we add that one layer of extra analysis, that one layer of extra context, and kind of, take the story on from there? So yeah, I think one of the questions we always try and answer is, what would be the question someone would Google after they've read this story? And can we just show them that information so they don't have to go away and Google it?
That's a really interesting insight, actually. I think I remember making the case back in my journalism days that actually the reason the FAQ format was so effective is it's just a way of forcing you to think, what questions are people actually asking? What do they want to know? So maybe to come over to you, Hazal. So you are the product analytics director of Wise, and that's an incredible business. Actually, I started using Wise recently. I was very impressed with the UX, I have to say. And so how do you use data there, and what's the difference between, you know, just showing a chart and telling a story in the context of product development and business strategy?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for including me. Well, I was listening to all the speakers. I was just so inspired to be here. And a couple of the people that I met before the panel, I'm an analyst. I work in, I'm on the data side of the data storytelling. I think a lot of the visuals that I've seen and the cool design perspectives that I've seen is really eye-opening. So just to give you guys some context, I lead the product analytics team at Wise. Wise is made up of a lot of little product teams. So you can think about each experience that a customer has with our product as a separate product team. So the analysts will be embedded in those teams. So they work with product managers, engineers, designers, UX researchers to every day basically help them make better decisions on where we take our product next. I exist within the walls of Wise, and my team exists within the walls of Wise to help enable better decision making. So the storytelling that I do is within that context. It's very internal facing. So it's answering a bunch of questions around what's working in our product, what could work better, what types of customers are using our product, what types of new features they need, what markets should we open to, what are the competitors doing, what's our feature parity, and using data to provide information. So to me, every data that we provide, unless it has that context, is useless, because everything that we put in front of our teams needs to have a point of view. So I typically think about the meaning of our work as, what are the decisions that we cannot make today, and what information do we need to be able to make that decision? And that's the piece that empowers the roadmap of my product team. So contextualizing what we're looking at and really understanding, okay, what is the problem that we're trying to solve is really, really key. So just to give you guys an example, you know, we launch a lot of products and sometimes they have low adoption. And a typical question that a product manager will come and ask is, why does my product have low adoption? And so we need to dissect that. Is it that you have low adoption, or is it that people are finding it really difficult to use? Or is it that you've built something that actually nobody has any intent to use? So you have to ask a lot of questions to get to the bottom of what is the problem that I'm trying to solve. And then you pull the data and you put it in the context of the problem that you're trying to solve. So that's something that we do on a day-to-day basis. That's why my team exists.
Thank you. Interesting. Maybe coming over to this side. So Martina, in your role as head of design at the Tony Blair Institute, I guess you deal with lots of different types of audiences. What do you do to adapt storytelling for those different audiences, and what works well when you're trying to communicate to an external audience versus maybe more of a policy wonky kind of smaller audience?
Yeah, we have a vast kind of demographic that we cater to. So we've got policy experts, we've got kind of government officials, we've got sort of young people on social media as well. And yeah, we tend to sort of track our audience and sort of understand what our audience needs, working with sort of external agencies to kind of gauge what our market is, and then yeah, adapt the stories. I think that obviously policy experts, government officials, they are very keen on granular exploratory data. So something that might be, you know, a dashboard for a client, a government client, might be a very, very pared down kind of snapshot on social media. And yeah, we kind of constantly gauge what's appropriate for which particular delivery channel. But yeah, we kind of go everywhere from, you know, really, really deep exploratory sort of mapping, kind of, you know, tools and toolkits for governments to an Instagram post.
I mean, that's, I guess, the theme there being that kind of this storytelling stuff has a role to play across all of them, and I guess bridging the exploration to the explanation is a big part of that. coming over to you, Carolyn, tell us a bit more about the categories of things that you do at RAB and what role data storytelling has played in helping you unlock change.
Very big question. I can probably answer it in two ways. One is my role from an inclusion perspective, which is only half my role because I'm operations officer as well, is internal. So how do we take what our internal data is saying about our staff, our employees, without breaking any GDPR rules? So if we look at the 13 departments, of which there are data analysts and there are developers, all the way through to client account people, to the finance team, how do they break down? That's number one. We use that then to try and drive policy. So a good example would be, we noted that returning women in certain departments weren't being able to readjust in the workplace and get their promotion as quickly as maybe the men that were still in the business. So that allowed us, having looked at the data, to say, right, we're going to start to engage our female staff that want to come back on a reassessment back into the workplace. So there's a 6-month program that they can join that overlaps the end of their maternity leave through to 3 months in the actual workplace to support them, to get them to readjust. Not all of them take it up, but those that have come back with the same level of confidence and self-esteem that they had beforehand. So that's a direct policy change. We also changed our inclusive hiring policy. So anybody that hires someone now has to go through an inclusivity program. That was based on some individuals that said to me, I love RAP. I love what RAP stood for. But when I was interviewed, finally, this came from the marketing science team, I was interviewed 4 times. Every time, as a woman, as a Black woman, I was interviewed by a white man that was probably in his 30s or 40s. I didn't see anybody I related to. So we checked all the data and looked and went, oh, we've got all these senior people that newcomers coming in couldn't relate to. So we changed the the recruitment process. So at some point, you meet a collection of people from the rest of the business. So you meet people from other departments, you meet other people that define or identify themselves in lots of different ways. And it had a huge impact on the number of people that were then interviewing with us and giving us a culture add rather than a culture fit. Give you enough examples?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We're getting lots of questions coming in from the audience. And so I wanted to dive into a few of those. Some of them are more philosophical and some of them are a bit more practical, sort of practitioner questions. So maybe to start with something quite specific and practitioner oriented, we've got someone here asking, where's that one gone? Visualizing missing data. Sometimes data is incomplete, or it might be that there are just particular data points that are null or invalid. How do we go about telling stories when the data is incomplete? Does anyone have any particular thoughts on that?
I think you've just got to call it out and decide, make a judgment on whether it's material or not to the story you're telling. I think if you get into the realms of like, oh, half the data is missing, but it doesn't really, don't worry about that. We'll publish it anyway. Then you're probably in the not so good realms. But I think, if there's a year of data missing during COVID, which every single data set in the world seems to have something wrong with its COVID data, call it out in a note, call it out in an explainer. From like a practical perspective, I think if it's, you have to make a judgment on the materiality of it. And if you think it doesn't, harm the integrity of the broader piece, then I think you can carry on with those caveats and those notes and explainers. But there's no hard and fast rule, 80% you have to give up or 60% or 90%. I think you have to make a judgment on what it is you're looking at. And it's probably a case by case basis as well. If it's a time series chart, thing going up over time and there's 1 year missing, chances are that it also went between that dot and didn't go somewhere else completely insane. So I think you just have to make a judgment call, and there's probably no hard and fast rule. But yeah, curious if anyone else has thoughts.
Yeah, I think rather than missing data, it's more of a, I guess it's a missing data, but we do a lot of polling and surveying at the Institute. And you'd be surprised by how much, the answers to our polling questions are don't know. And we've had multiple conversations about, do we include that? Do we not include it? Oh, it's just on the stacked bar. It's just a lot of gray for don't knows. That's not very nice looking. Let's just get rid of it. I always advocate for inclusion of the don't knows, because that in itself can be a story. So yeah, I don't think missing data is actually missing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Often that goes back to the point about context, that often that's an important part of the context. And maybe most of the data is officially not valid, but even that is an interesting data point in itself. To move on to another question here, how do you go about dealing with the fact that some audiences, some colleagues are drawn to complexity and want to show everything, sometimes at the expense of presenting a clear story? Is that something you have to juggle in product analytics?
Yeah. I mean, I typically find, so this is actually something the analysts or data scientists sometimes struggle with. When you do a cool piece of analysis, you take pride in how cool and complicated that analysis is, and you want to make sure that your audience knows all the intricacies of everything that you've gone through, when that's not the point at all, especially if they're presenting it to a non-technical audience, or that audience is just looking for the answer to the problem that they're trying to solve. That's where I think real storytelling really comes into play. We have to coach the team a lot on how do you start with your why, give the main takeaway of your insights, and then if anybody is interested, they can read the nuances. But I think that's a really hard skill that typically people don't get really formally trained on. So there's a lot of feedback involved. A lot of the materials that my team produces sometimes misses that context. Even though they started with the context, they're clear on the problem, they're clear on the question. By the time they analyze, they've actually forgotten that context, or things have gotten really far away from that context. So you want to really coach them to bring them back to the question. What was the problem that you were trying to solve? And what are a few findings that you found that helps us solve that problem? Let's start with that. And then anything additional that people might be interested in, you can share, but you always want to tie it back to, if I only have 30 seconds to consume this information, what is it that I want to take away?
There's a balance to that as well. So if there's one thing that really irritates me about some of our clients that we work with, is they get so excited about the detail and the complexity because they are data scientists, that we quite often have to ask them, but why? So they go, but we can do this and we can do that. It's like, but why? Because if you don't have that why, you don't have that context, what's the point interrogating the data unless you know what problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, sorry, just on that, because that piece is so important. I find that people who ask for a lot of data are people who have just no clue. I mean, maybe I'm massively generalizing, but they most of the time actually have no clue where to start. And they're just hoping that if they stare at a bunch of numbers, that will tell them what problem they need to solve. So if you ask them, why are you interested in this, all like over and over again, that actually hopefully simplifies a lot of the information that they're interested in looking at.
It's interesting. It feels like there's a relationship between what you're talking about there and what David was saying about what question would the audience ultimately Google. It's like being clear what subject you're grappling with, what question you're trying to answer. We had John Byrne-Murdoch from the FT in recently giving a talk here, and he was talking about the overwhelming importance of chart titles and text in that. That very often you might have a graphic that's interactive or is helping you understand something. Once you've worked out what it is that you're really telling with it, really front loading that insight, almost like a chart title, sort of forces you to come back and say, what's the purpose of this visualization? Almost like you could cover up the visualization. You can get the finding from the title, then you're reinforcing the audience's ability to kind of understand what you're trying to say, and the data becomes more a supporting act to the point. I kind of feel that's something you do in Charter quite a lot as a long-standing reader. You lean quite heavily on text and annotation. Do you think that's a...
Yeah, massively. I think like I was talking internally about, chart making in the world of news, and it's such a free pass. I'm not surprised at all that John, who's probably one of the best in the world at storytelling with data, had that view. You literally get a free pass to tell people why this chart is interesting, why they should look at it, and what you think they should take away from it. So absolutely use that. We've basically fallen into kind of a formulaic template that we use with pretty much every chart we do, which is big editorialized kind of title, number of babies called Alexa goes down, or something like that, and then you have a sub-legend or a more factual kind of boring explainer of exactly what the data is, the years it was from, all the boring explanatory stuff that's really important so that people can build that trust. But yeah, anytime I see a chart without a title, it's absolutely maddening, because it's such a free pass to tell people what, you've spent hours looking at this data. Tell them why that's interesting. Hopefully the chart is compelling on its own, but yeah, it's definitely a lot of white space, I think.
We've actually kind of developed like a template for the editorial to write sort of titles and captions to be able to kind of explain the chart. Like you said, what you want to do is you just want to know where exactly to look at, rather than try and spend the next 2-3 minutes deciphering it, because no one will. They'll just scroll over.
Absolutely.
There is the element as well from an accessibility perspective, because if you just had the title, but you're a visual person, you'll ignore the title, and vice versa. So it's why you need that yin and yang. And accessibility is very key, particularly in this area where you have so many people that are more neurodivergent that need both.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because also I guess once you force yourself to get that text and that framing title right, I think there can also be a useful exercise that then you look back at the chart again and you say, well, actually, is the chart really articulating that key point, which might force you to gray out all the other lines that isn't the one you have in mind, that kind of thing.
Yeah, just to add to that, if you don't mind, I think often we'll come up with the chart title first, or I'll say like, "Oh, this is interesting." Say to one of our journalists, "Can you go and explore this? Here's what I would love to show. Can you tell me if this exists, or can you find the data and analyze it and see if that is indeed true?" So yeah, we often start with what's the headline that's going to make someone want to read this, and can we provide the context with the chart afterwards.
Another question from the audience here. Storytelling feels like a fundamentally human ability. Do you see any opportunities for AI here, or is it an existential threat? I don't know if this is front of mind for any of you. Anyone been playing with AI in data storytelling?
I've dabbled a little bit in it. I think at the moment it's very good for what I found it personally for like analyzing my data. So I can have a massive old spreadsheet, plug it into ChatGPT, and tell it find the trends, find the insights, find the kind of the 3 major sort of points of interest in the data, and it will spit it out. So that saves me hours of my time. I think when it comes to creatively then visualizing that data, I think there's still a long way to go. At the moment, it will spit out, a perfectly serviceable chart. But when you kind of try and push it to the edge a bit, to kind of, into sort of a bit more of a data art, it's more of a kind of brainstorming partner rather than a tool. Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say at this point in product development, it's more of an enabler. I think it does a great job giving you quick highlights of the data that you're looking at. But going back to my first point around, I think what we produce is as meaningful as the questions that it answers, and that those questions, ChatGPT doesn't have the context. I think you can spend a lot of time feeding that information, and then it will get smarter over time, or future AI tools will continue to get smarter over time and have company-wide context in terms of what might be meaningful and what's not. But it's still up to the analysts and data science teams to interpret that information and go back to the teams and say, I know you were trying to do this. We know that this is what's happening at a macro level. This is why we might be seeing some things going down, but this is what the data is saying, and here's how we can action on it. I think getting to that actionability and that suggestion on what to do next is something that the AI tools are not capable just yet, because they're missing a lot of that background that is really key.
I mean, but what you both said very much fits with our experience at Canva, where we've got a very highly used set of AI tools. And from speaking to our users, we generally find that people are seeing it as an enabler, and it's short-circuiting manual work rather than replacing the more human bit. I think we're probably getting quite close to the end of our slot, maybe a few more minutes. Here's another question that I think everyone who's spent any time working in visualization has occasionally grappled with. So yeah, I imagine most of you have some thoughts on this. Is there a balance to be had between making beautiful data visualizations and insightful, useful ones? Who would like to kick this one off? Okay, in the absence of, okay.
Yeah, I think this is the classic debate. Like basically everyone, like you said, who's ever made a chart has probably thought, about this trade-off. I think for us, you have to not let the complexity get in the way of the story. So if it in any way models the story, I think it has to go. And I think that sometimes is coming back to the complexity point. I completely agree with everything you both said on that, and agree with people who ask for all of the data generally have no idea what they actually want. I think sometimes when it comes to like the design elements, stripping it back is so much more powerful. The number of times I've had a story in mind and made a chart, and I've remade it and I've made it again, and I've got this scatter plot and it's like color coded and there's a logo, and the end of the story is thing is going up or thing is going down, and I've massively overcomplicated it, but it looks really nice. And I think showing it to my team and they just go, look, I think this is a line chart. I am really sorry. I think this is a line chart. And that's having that kind of that feedback is really helpful, because sometimes when you've been looking at a data set for so long as well, absolutely every quirk of it, the outliers, when it started, when it finished, when it went up and down, and it feels almost like you know it inside out. And so when you present it, you want to present it in increasingly complicated ways, but sometimes somebody coming at it fresh just needs the headline: what is happening and what is this data set showing? And yeah, absolutely, we get caught up on the design stuff. I do all the time, logos and gradients and all the chart junk that's really tempting, but sometimes it's just easier to strip back.
I think there's quite a lot of data designers out there that already strike a really good balance between beautiful visualizations and insightful visualizations. Like Federica Fragapane, Valentina was mentioned earlier, like they combine sort of data art and really good insight. And I think what the kind of the aesthetic layer can bring is kind of layer of like emotiveness to it, that I think a stripped back chart sometimes just doesn't have. And sometimes that's fine. You don't need it. You just need to just tell, the basic story. But sometimes kind of the layer of emotion is really important. That's part of the message.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I think on the journalistic side, people like John Bermudak, who we were mentioning as well, strike a very good balance of knowing when to branch out into that slightly more advanced chart type, or to add something that's just a little bit distinctive and unique, that captures something about the data but doesn't distract from it. How does that all land with you? Is that something you grapple with in your work as well?
Not really. I mean, again, like I said, I was very fascinated by all the beautiful charts that I've seen, unless it's really necessary and we can't communicate it in any other form. It's really rare that we will use very complicated visualizations. I wish we had as many beautiful charts as I've seen today, but a lot of our visualization is actually quite simplistic. And the way that I get to the filtering is actually even before the visualization. I'm really strict with my team in terms of how they spend their time. It really bothers me when they just go down a rabbit hole looking for information when we don't need to go down that route. So I usually typically stop them at the data part, like, do we need this information before you even visualize it? But when we do visualize, it's I think more on the simplistic side.
I think just the chart of the grid of line charts for each borough, I think was it COVID cases, is a really good example of something that just nails it. Like, it was really beautiful to look. I mean, the data was morbid, so obviously it wasn't beautiful, but like the presentation was beautiful. You could see the trend for every single borough, and I think that's the perfect example to me of something that does actually strike a really beautiful aesthetic, and actually it's really informative. Like, you can still see the trend for each borough.
Yeah, it's not always a trade-off, totally. Yeah.
I think, sorry, can I just add one thing? Is going back to what you said earlier on, is it's all down to the audience. So you can get so wrapped up in what the data's telling you, but you need to know who your audience is, because a line graph might be right. I liked the borough one too. You're right, it's morbid data, but it was so simple. But then the flower thing, I know there's people that I work with that would love that because they'd take it on board so much more. So your audience and your context is absolutely key. That's got to drive, I think, what you use and the approach that you use and how you deliver that story. That
certainly fits with our experience of Flourish, where I think we were partly responsible for the trend in bar chart races, for example, a few years ago. And it's a really interesting one because in a way, you know, bar chart race is effectively a line chart played through time. On the other hand, what's interesting is that when people look at one, they basically can't look away until it's finished. So you get someone's attention for about 90 seconds. And that's actually quite a lot of time. It's very difficult to get someone to look at a line chart and take in the whole thing, look at it sequentially through time. So there's something about, yeah, what is the audience, but also what is the means of engagement? Like, is this a sort of theatrical thing where the challenge is holding their attention, or is this more about incisive insight? We've got maybe time for one last question. I'm going to combine two here because there's two on the same theme. So someone has asked, how do we tackle the misuse of data, as shown in the New Yorker's deep dive on the Lucy Letby case, where the pivotal graph was missing key info and a full picture? And someone else has asked, with concerns around disinformation today, is there any distrust of data and how can this be combated? Maybe Martina, is this a, I mean, given that you're working with a lot of public data and data about the world, is this a theme that you come up against?
Sort of, not necessarily professionally that much. I think the misuse of data, how we try to tackle it at TBI is well, it kind of comes at like collecting the data in the first place, how you collect it, what's your methodology, sort of to be very, you know, to have a very sort of good methodology behind it, sort of waterproof, watertight, and then making sure that every bit of data is analyzed, even though if it's not used at the end, that it's looked at and compared and contrasted. We have had, you know, in the past, a theory for a paper that, you know, made a claim, an economic claim, and the data on the surface supported that claim. But when we actually went and visualized the entire data set, we noticed that a lot of the data was just ignored. And that was a really, really huge part of the story. So yeah, I would say just analyze all of your data, even though if you're not going to use it. I think in general, I really don't know how to tackle mistrust in data, because there is like everything is, you know, nothing is real, everything is, but like you know, anything is potentially made up and not true. And yeah, I don't really have an answer to that.
That's a really interesting,
very pessimistic.
Academic study recently that someone was showing, where it asked groups of people in the States, what do you think of this fact or this claim? And it said the world is getting warmer due to climate change. And the reaction was basically people who already were skeptical about climate change just assumed it was wrong. Then it said the next version was, experts say that global warming is happening and the world's getting warmer due to climate change. That has stronger negative reaction because people assume these experts are wrong. Then it had the same stat over a chart that just showed rising temperature. And it was astonishing how that completely transformed people's interpretation of whether this was a real thing. And it's something like 80% of the people then thought this was true. So I think in a way that's a positive thing, because it shows that actually what we do with visualization and storytelling can really make a difference to how people interpret the world. I guess that's also a potentially dark power because people assume it's true. So I'm careful what you put in a chart. But I think we've hit our time limit. So thank you so much to all the panelists. Let's hear it for them. And I guess one theme, if I was going to try and sort of boil down what we've talked about, would be thinking of what you're doing from the perspective of the audience, which you all expressed in different ways of being about what question is really being asked and are you really answering it with your research and with your visualization. So with that, say again, 10-minute break, apparently. Yeah, see you in 10.